Does President Trump hate President Zelensky?
He bullies Zelensky. He bullies Zelensky. Trump fundamentally doesn't think, and I don't. Let me break this down to you in a couple of things, because I've talked to a lot of people who have met Trump. And what they'll say about Trump is, and these are sometimes people who know all the stories about Trump, about his temper, about his crazed social media behavior. And they'll say that when you meet him, he can be very charming. He can actually be quite charming and quite interested in you, right? And he was, he's a businessman. So he wants to get on people's good side, at least to make deals and so on. But the thing about Trump is that beyond that, it's not a question of liking or hating someone. It's whether he can bully them into submission. Now, there's very few people he will not try to bully. And this is where it becomes interesting.
Vladimir Putin?
He will not try to bully Vladimir Putin. He will not try to bully Putin. And it is really interesting that...
And why?
Because Trump... This is going to be really... Trump is fundamentally an insecure person.
What does this mean?
This may be striking, because you think about Trump and it's like, wow, I'm the most important, I'm the biggest. I don't know if you've had this in real life, but sometimes when I meet people in real life, say, I'm the most important person. Look at me. Look at what I do. And I look and I think, you're one of the most insecure person I've met. You're trying to get me to give you approval, either by saying I like you or by bullying me into accepting your dominance of me, because you're just not even secure in terms of where you are. And with Putin, you always look at the entry points for the relationship. And, Donald Trump, since at least the 90s, has wanted to do business in Russia, post-Soviet Russia. He's wanted the Trump Tower in Moscow, and Ivanka Trump sitting in sitting in the chair in the Kremlin, right? Like the leader's chair in the Kremlin, because nobody else is around. I'm like trying to picture that. And then that episode in 2013, which I think I've told you before, but just to repeat it, where Trump has the Miss Universe pageant and he takes it to Moscow. Why does he take it to Moscow? Because he wants to do business deals and he wants to meet Putin. He just wants to meet this guy, right? And Putin can't meet him, but he sends him a nice present. And the reason why I think Putin has this position is Trump doesn't like allies. He thinks allies rip him off.
But not Putin.
But Putin's not an ally, right? So it's not a question of getting ripped off by Putin. There's nothing to rip off at that point, right? So he looks at Putin and thinks, I just want this guy to like me in terms of it. He's the same way with Xi Jinping in China. He wants Xi to like him as well, right? And it's interesting that this meeting that was supposed to be at the end of the month in Beijing may be called off because of the war on Iran. But for all the tariffs on China, for all the fronting up to China, he wants Xi to like him. He doesn't bully Viktor Orban because Orban's an autocrat. And he doesn't bully, he initially tried to bully Kim Jong-un in South Korea, but then once he got the invitation to go see Kim, even though nothing of substance was agreed there, then it's like he doesn't try to bully Kim, right? So these autocrats that are across the way, he doesn't try to bully. People who have relationships where they should be cooperating or working with the United States, he tries to bully them because he doesn't look at it as a cooperative relationship. He looks at it as it's a win-lose. I'm going to win something, you're going to give it to me. So where is he with Zelensky? And I think you have to go back to the fact that he has no respect for Zelensky in 2019 when he tries to bully him into dishing the dirt on Biden. And then instead of thinking, well, Zelensky's a tough negotiator. That's always Trump's compliment by someone that he's a tough negotiator. He's thinking that this guy almost got me impeached. I really don't like that. And then there's a timing issue as well, which is, and again, I'm going to have to preface this by let's state the obvious. Trump knows very little about Ukraine. He knows very little about Volodymyr Zelensky. All he's thinking is in 2025, I've come back into the U.S. presidency. I should have been the president this should have been my third term, which is not legal, but this should have been my third term. the election was rigged in 2020. I'm back in office. I'm going to get retribution against my enemies. I'm going to slap tariffs on people. I'm going to make them do what I want. And so with Zelensky is, I'm going to make this guy do what I want. And Zelensky is too proud a leader to completely bend the knee before Trump. He'll be very polite to Trump. He'll flatter Trump, but he won't bend the knee before him. And that meant that, no, Trump's not going to get in a position like. But I will say this, there are moments, Daniel, though, remember, where you do see this breaking through, where Zelensky plays Trump so well. And remember that story about why the U.S. why the U.S. restored intelligence sharing and why it restored selling military equipment to Ukraine, and then even the U.S. sanctions on Russia. Remember the meeting in the Vatican. And so this would have been, the spring of 2025. We've gone through the episode in the White House. Ukraine and Europe have worked very hard to prevent a complete break with the Americans. But then Zelensky gets FaceTime with Donald Trump on the sidelines of the funeral of Pope Francis in the Basilica. And this is very much a staged event. If you watch the full video of that, you see the way that the chairs are being set up because they know that the cameras are going to be there, right? But Zelensky has got FaceTime with Trump, and I think it may have been about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, and he can explain to Trump what it's like under the Russian invasion, especially the Russian aerial attacks. That got to Trump. Zelensky got Trump into listening mode where Trump wasn't trying to bully. Right? The problem is, of course, the Kremlin are going to try to get Trump back into the mode of being that bully again, thinking he'll bully Zelensky but not Putin, which is why Putin had to go to Alaska in August of 2025. Sorry, we're going in deep here, but the thing about Trump here is I've always used the catchphrase, he spins like a weather vane, right? You never know which way he is. If you've got someone that spins like in a weather vane, you've got to figure out which way the wind is blowing, right? And there are times when it does blow in Ukraine's favor. So how can they manipulate Trump at that point? But again, even if you can manipulate Trump, what about a J.D. Vance? What about a defense secretary like P. Hegseth? Because those guys ain't going away, and they're not your friends either.
From your perspective, is President Trump a Russian asset? We have been discussing this for a while, but let's do our final analysis of this and make the case why he is or he is not Russian asset, intentionally or unintentionally.
The Kremlin thinks he's an asset. So let's repeat what we mean here. Like an operative is someone that works with an intelligence service, right? If I'm a CIA officer, I'm an operative. If you're in the old KGB, if you're in FSB, GRU, you're a Russian operative. Then you'll have agents. Now your agents know they're agents, right? They know they're agents because you might be paying them. They know they're agents because they might be getting some type of ego trip of working for you, right? And certainly the Russians have agents. You know, part of my academic background is studying this going back to the start of the Cold War. But an asset is different because that asset has not necessarily been recruited to be an agent. Nobody went up to Donald Trump and said, "Here I am, I am Sergey, I am Yuri. Will you come work for us?" Right? What was done from the late 1970s is that the Soviets and their allies put people in close to Trump to try to establish a relationship with him. And again, I think I've mentioned, Trump's first wife was Czech. The Czech services try to get people close to him. The Russians from the 1980s get people in New York City to try to make contact with him. And again, this doesn't mean that Trump is an agent. And it doesn't even mean at that point that he's really an asset, because Trump doesn't know they're doing this, right? Trump's just being a businessman. The type of businessman who at one point got fooled by a Gorbachev imitator and thinking that Mikhail Gorbachev had shown up in front of Trump Tower. Didn't happen, right? Trump likes having his ego flattered. The Russians know this. When we pick up this story in the 21st century, what the Russians have already done is they've put people into Trump's condominium. Those are some of his big projects, right? He's got them all across the United States. He's got a big development in Florida. The Russians buy up a lot of those condos. Then they get that house, his house that he has in Florida, which is, I think he bought it for around about $46 million. It's not in good shape. Got mold in it and so on. It's down near Palm Beach. And the Russians effectively buy up that house. They use someone. It's not like the KGB, again, not like the FSB says, or the intelligence service say, well, you'd like to buy your house, Donald, here's all the cash for it. But they get a Russian businessman who's supposed to say, oh, this will be nice. Lovely place for me to buy. I'll pay you $95 million for it. One of the largest property sales in history, or for a house. And Trump says, sure, I'll take that money. And off you go. And as I said earlier, again, he goes to Moscow in 2013. And he's there talking to a couple of very important Russian billionaires, thinking, okay, maybe I can get this Trump Tower built. He's there with the head of one of Russia's largest banks, Erman Gref, is there, chatting away with him. And there will be Russian officials who are there. Well, Vladimir's not going to meet him, but he's going to send him that nice lacquered box with the note in it. And Trump's, look, he sent me that. He said, Trump loves letters and notes from you. And that means that when you get to 2015, 2016, the Russians want him to win that election. And the Russians intervene to help him win that election. And everybody out there who uses the word Russiagate and says it's a hoax, you can kiss my backside at this point, because the facts are clearly established out there that this was the Russian king. And the only question here is, did Trump know that the Russians thought he was so much of an asset, they want him to get into the White House? And you know what the answer to that is? Ding, ding. Yes, they certainly do. What does it mean when you get a professor, Joseph Mifsud, who has contacts with the Russian leadership, who tells a Trump campaign staffer, George Papadopoulos, in London, we can get you Hillary's emails? What do you think that means, right? That's not just being nice. That's actually an offer to try to build up the relationship. What does it mean when the Russians send back the message that gets to Donald Trump Jr.? We've got damaging material on Hillary. And Donald Trump Jr. says, I love it. And invites the Russians to come to New York to meet him in Trump Tower. Now, at the end of the day, there's a little bit of funny business going on with the Russians. They don't actually have the information to hand over, and they kind of screw it up. But they weren't. What does it mean when the Russians use WikiLeaks to dump the emails from the Democratic National Committee and from Clinton's campaign staff? And some of Trump's associates know that the Russians are doing that, like Roger Stone. Yeah, it means that the Kremlin consider Trump an asset. And I'm just going to repeat this. In spring of 2017, when the Russian ambassador to the United States and when Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are in Washington, Trump has been president for what, just over 3 months? He has just fired the FBI director, James Comey. Why did he fire Comey? Because Comey would not pledge loyalty to him over the Russia investigation. And Trump comes into that room, and does Trump say, let's discuss serious matters of trade, let's discuss our military links, let's discuss where we are in terms of what might be involved with Ukraine, for example? Nope. He says, I just fired that nutcase Comey. And Lavrov, you can just imagine Lavrov's trying not to smile at this point. Really? And he comes up to them, and he just starts like this, to the point where he's telling them U.S. intelligence secrets in Syria. And Lavrov, one of the most skilled diplomatics out there, nasty, but one of the most skilled diplomatics out there, is just taking it all in. They know they've got Trump. They've got Trump not because they had to pay him, not because they had to give him any particular favors. They've got him for the reason why you get a great asset. that person simply wants to please you. Just wants to please you. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump just wanted to please the Kremlin.
Another topic before we go to war in Iran.
Yeah.
Relations between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Alaska summit. From your perspective, for how many times has Vladimir Putin overplayed his hand?
Yeah, and again, because sometimes when we get our comments, they say, "Oh, Trump's definitely in Putin's pocket. He's always," and you and I discuss and say, "Well, sometimes Trump isn't in Putin's pocket because even if he wants to please Putin or Putin to be happy with him, he still has his own personal interests that are involved here." And so in August of 2025, going into that summit, remember that the Russians are on the back foot because they've already overplayed their hand because they've become too blatant in the mass killings of civilians in Ukraine. They just are heavy period of just trying to level Ukrainian cities as well as Ukrainian infrastructure. If I remember right, one of the most intense attacks was on July the 4th, American Independence Day. And Trump gets the news. Look at what the Russians have done there. And so Trump starts sending out messages on social media saying, "What's going on here? This is wrong. This is wrong that all these Ukrainians are getting killed." And so the Russians are thinking, God, if we keep doing this, we're going to get sanctioned. That was what they wanted to push back sanctions at that point. And so it's like, okay, we've got to give Trump the face-to-face. We've got to give Trump that face-to-face meeting because he always wants that face-to-face with Putin. And if you remember the start of that meeting, the optics go really well for the Russians. So it's like you've got the American military giving red carpet treatment for Putin, that they have that raised platform, that Trump's guiding him there, right? It's like, almost hand in hand with Putin. And then something goes badly wrong because when they come out for the press conference, Trump just looks defeated. And I kind of misread it because I thought when he was defeated, I thought initially, oh my gosh, he's just given in to Putin again, especially because it's really strange. Usually it's the host of the summit that speaks first. And if you remember that, it wasn't. It was Putin who spoke first. All about, look at me, I'm glad. Look, this is great. We've got a great relationship. Look, Russia will achieve. And I was thinking back to Helsinki in 2018 when Trump also looked defeated. Again, Putin had just completely played him at that summit. Turns out it was a slight of a misread this time because it came out that in their private meeting, Putin went too far. Putin got the maps out. And Trump doesn't like it when you give him maps that are hard to read. He wants it simple, right? Putin's got the maps out. And Putin goes into one of his history lessons. Now, you all in Ukraine will know this. There are legendary stories about Putin going on for hours about medieval history. Stuff that is way above my pay grade. I'll have to study for years to learn all of this. But Putin, this is like, it's part of where Putin gets this whole idea that Ukraine should be part of Russia from, and that he's a great leader like these past Russian leaders. And so he's giving it all this to Trump, and Trump's bored. Trump doesn't do history lessons, right? And he doesn't do it. And so he comes out of that session thinking, why did I have to go through all of that, right? I just want a deal. Where's the deal? Where's the deal? And Putin would not give Trump the deal because, of course, at that point, the Americans are not ready to give up, sacrifice all of the Donbass. So there's nothing achieved at that summit. And Putin goes away thinking, okay, I've gotten Trump to listen to him. But then it becomes clear that no, there are people in the American administration that are going to exploit Trump's dissatisfaction. And this is how you explain the fact that even if Trump has this relationship with Putin where he really wants to impress him, he wants to succeed, he's at a point where he's unhappy and where others in the administration get the space to put the sanctions on the Russian oil companies, which takes us into October, right? And I'm sorry, the reason why it's great doing this at length, I hope we aren't boring anybody, it's great doing this at length because what you can do is you can track all of this almost in the swing of a pendulum in terms of what goes back. So if I could just go a bit forward on the story, because remember, I always say, but it's not just Trump, folks. It's not just Trump. By October, the Trump administration has sanctioned Rosneft and Gazprom. And probably equally important, they've sanctioned any customers. And this is why the Indians cut back on their sales. The Turks cut back on their sales. The Chinese cut back on their sales. Russian revenues down 50% at the start of this year. But then this is where the Kremlin plays its next card, which is, okay, we haven't succeeded with Trump. We're going to succeed with Steve Witkoff.
And we have that phone call between Kirill Dmitriev, Yuri Ushakov probably, and Kirill Dmitriev. This phone call was leaked by maybe European intelligence.
Yes, you better believe European
according
intelligence.
to rumors in social media. And this is a huge story about this phone call, Steve Witkoff advising Yuri Ushakov to appease President Trump and organize this phone call and playing in Russian hand.
Yeah, because the sanctions have been decided, but now it's the Tomahawks questions come into play, right? So is the U.S. going to give these long-range... Now, they don't have as many Tomahawks to give Ukraine now because of what we're going to discuss in a second. But you can imagine what Ukraine could do with some of these Tomahawks in terms of hitting high-value Russian installations, supporting the war. And so around about 14th of October, Yuri Ushakov calls Witkoff. They talk. I'm not sure who called each other. That's an interesting question. They talk. The Russians have played Witkoff since they first met him in April. And again, I've mentioned this to you before, but I'll repeat it. The Russians had psychologically profiled all of Trump's advisors. They did not want Keith Kellogg, the general, to be the envoy to Ukraine and Russia. So they tell the White House, we don't want to deal with him. And so he only becomes the envoy to Ukraine. Why? Kellogg's sharp, smart guy. And he also believes in European security. Witkoff doesn't. Witkoff's a real estate developer. I'm going to get a deal. I'm going to get a deal. I'm going to be important. I'm going to get a deal. I'm going to get a deal for my boss, Donald Trump. And Kirill Dmitriev, Vladimir Putin's top financial advisor, handles the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, shows Witkoff around St. Petersburg, shows him around Moscow, takes him into that meeting in the Kremlin where Witkoff doesn't have a single American with him, even a translator. They've got Witkoff now. And they still got Witkoff. Fast forward to October. The Russians are in trouble. Witkoff says to Ushakov, you've got to do something to get Trump back on board. What? So Witkoff is now advising the Kremlin, you've got to get Trump back on board. Steve, how about advising the Russians on, we want you to stop the invasion? That would be really, really good advice. But no, we want to help you get Trump back on board. Wow. Okay, how are we going to do it? Send Kirill. Send Dmitriev, right? And Dmitriev comes out to meet with Witkoff and Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is not a diplomat, who is compromised by billions of dollars of investments in various parts of the world, who should not be handling any of this because of that conflict of interest. But on October 28th, I'll remember this date for as long as I live, they hash out a 28-point ultimatum, not a plan, not a peace plan, an ultimatum. So just a couple of weeks after the sanctions have been imposed on the Russians, and after we had the possibility of the Tomahawk missiles, now Witkoff and Kushner are saying, let's figure out a way, or let's work with Dmitriev so Ukraine gives up all of the Donbass and do it. And so once again, having kind of pushed that stone up the hill to get Ukraine's security, now the stones come rolling down again, and we got to push it all the way back up because, again, it's important that a lot of our discussion has been on Trump, but you're dealing with a dysfunctional, chaotic Trump group. If you want to call them an administration, go ahead. A Trump group. Some of those folks believe in Ukraine's security. Some of those folks don't. And ultimately, it's a question of which faction in the U.S. is the one that gets the upper hand.